All right, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for all of those of you who were able to get into the meeting on time. I appreciate it. Just in awareness of everybody's time, we're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome. Good afternoon. My name is Christina Sims, and I'm the Director of Youth Services and a member of the Southington Public Schools Coalition. On behalf of the Coalition, we'd like to welcome you to the final presentation in our series of community conversations. Today's topic is understanding white privilege and its presence in our community. For those of you who have been to all three presentations, thank you for participation and for being part of our forward movement. For those of you who are here today for the first or second time, thank you for being here to hear multiple perspectives on this very important topic. Before we get started and I turn it over to our speakers and go over the parameters for today's meeting, I'd like to share a little bit about how I first learned about white privilege. To hear this term when it was first presented was so hard. For me, and like anything that was new, I really needed to take time to understand it. I needed to adjust my thinking, educate myself, and then adjust again. I first heard the term more than 20 years ago when I was in college. My first response was a knee-jerk reaction to the word privilege, and the word privilege only. My next response was to try to reason it out. Looking in the mirror, I saw a proud Hispanic woman, the woman my family raised me to be, the woman who came from New Mexico and who didn't understand the word white privilege. I had the last name Rodriguez and I was proud of it. I thought to myself, I'm not white. Then I forced myself to take a step back and look again. Through some self-exploration, there it was staring back at me in the mirror. The color of my skin is white. So without knowing anything about me or what I've been through in my life, what I've had to overcome to get where I am, my white privilege was staring back at me. I need to further understand my privilege and to work to ensure that how we proceed as a town and a community is more inclusive and equitable for all. This is important to me as an advocate for social justice, someone who is committed to a career of working with youth, and a mother raising a family. This coalition is very important. The coalition, for those of you who are new, and a reminder for those of you who have participated, is a response to a racist video posted by a student in January 2019. It was a call to action. The goal in forming the coalition was to develop a district-wide equity policy and plan, and to create the sustainable change that contributes to the well-being of every Southington resident and student. First, our coalition needed training, education, and some very honest conversations among all of us. The coalition spent 2 years learning and developing a very intentional plan that would create sustainable change here in Southington. Through this work, 7 committees were formed with the coalition members, and they are the following: curriculum and instruction, student voice and leadership, professional learning and staff development, data and demographics, social media marketing, workforce and talent management, and our committee, community awareness, collaboration, and partnerships. At this point, I'd like to thank all of the coalition members and all of you who have been a part of this journey, as well as the dynamic women that I work with on this specific committee. It's Josie Regala, Erica Byrne, Missy Cipriano, Crystal Mitchell, Gloria Menguel, Michelle LeBron Griffin, Jen LeBron, Lauren Johns, and Ingrid Kennedy. The work of the coalition aligns with the vision as it is of the graduate. It develops and implements culturally relevant and professional development for all staff, creates a learning environment that affirms the identity of each member of the learning community, creates a physical and emotional safe environment for every student, and it raises awareness for families in the learning community that supports and advocates for equitable learning opportunities for all students. Today's call to action is to create a movement among educators, students, families across the district that eliminates the oppression and provides the same privilege and opportunities that white people have benefited for the last 400 years. How can we do this? We can still start with self-exploration and introspection. We can dive deeper into our collective history. We can seek multiple perspectives. We can persevere, and we can speak out. Today's conversation is a call to action, and the purpose is to build understanding and raise consciousness about our community, to improve racial equality and inclusion for all residents. Before I hand over today to the speakers, we just want to go over a few guidelines. Just so you're aware, while speakers are presenting, all mics will be kept muted and the chat will be used to communicate with the host only. Each speaker will have approximately 10 minutes to share their perspective. During our last conversation, we were not able to hear everyone's perspective because time did not allow. Today, we've modified our plan so that we would allow for other additional perspectives to be shared. After the speakers have presented, we will provide an opportunity to share perspective using the raise hand feature, or you can indicate that you have something to share by contacting the host. Once you've been acknowledged and unmuted, you will have 3 minutes. We ask that all contributions be brief, respectful, and on topic so that we can learn and grow together. Just to make sure that everybody is aware, we will allow for as many perspectives as time permits. However, the last opportunity will be at 5:20. We'll allow the next speaker who is on deck at 5:20 to share their perspective, and then we want to allow for us to wrap up as a group. Now that everything is clear, I'd like to introduce the speakers we have for today. My pleasure to introduce Ingrid Kennedy, Executive Director of CERC, Steve Medancy, our Assistant Superintendent, Pastor Sharon Holtz from the First Baptist Church here in Southington, and Trevor Messina, who is not only a Southington graduate, class of 2020, he's a former Board of Education member, a coalition member, and most importantly, the youth voice for today. Now, if I were allowed to go over all of Trevor's accomplishments in the time that he's been in Southington, that would be the entire meeting. So Trevor, I had to keep it brief. But if we could allow, I appreciate everybody who is here today, and we're going to turn it over to Ingrid.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Christina, for that wonderful introduction and from your perspective as it relates to white privilege in the personal experience. As Christina mentioned, my name is Ingrid Kennedy, and I love the way how I was introduced as the executive director, as a parent, and as a grandparent, which is one of the things that I'm loving right now. So thank you so much for that. I also love being a parent, and being a grandparent is even a double love. So I'm just so excited. And as Christina mentioned, I need to bring you a little bit of history because I was charged today with presenting you with the definition, what is white privilege? And just by the fact and through Christina's introduction, engaging in a conversation that has two intense words associated with it, which is white and privilege. White meaning race, and privilege is an action, something that just because of that, some group or individuals are able to do. So that definitely creates a lot of dissonance. So what I would like to do first, I want to acknowledge the fact that over the last 2 years, I have had the privilege, I'm going to put it that way, the privilege to come to your community and interact with an amazing group of individuals, members of your community that committed themselves to the work of the Social Justice Coalition. Over the last 2 years, I have visited your community. I have shopped. I have my favorite restaurant. I have my favorite store. And I have interacted. So I have not come into the community just to provide a training and leave. I have become part of it. And you have a beautiful community. So today, for me to share with you this information, it means a lot because what I see what the coalition has done, these conversations in the moving forward. So you have my commitment to continue to support the coalition in your community in any way that I can. So in order to be able to engage and define white privilege, the understanding. What does it mean? I need to bring you back to history. 400 years ago. 400 years ago, a division was created in the nation, and it became the concept of the other. The concept of the other is when those who make decisions see everybody else as the other. That happened 400 years ago. Now I'm going to bring you forward a little bit into history. I'm going to bring you to May 25th, 2020, when each one of us witnessed a life extinguished just before our eyes, George Floyd. And because we are in the midst of the pandemic, we were all in the safety of our own homes and witnessed what happened to a man of color. For 8 minutes and 46 seconds, he cried out to his mother, who was dead. So he knew exactly what was happening to him. Because 400 years, and because May 25th, this coalition have to bring the community in a conversation, because for too long, as a society, as a community, we have ignored many of the facts that many of our Black and brown communities have screamed and yelled out, the injustice. However, because of the history, I need to use this quote that it is before you, that I have shared with the coalition, and I always share as I'm doing these sessions. Not any one of us in this virtual space right now, and this is by Debbie Irvin, not one of us created the mess, the history of 400 years ago, the systemic things that create injustice. However, we have the power to undo it. So as Debbie Irvin says, American racism is so twisted up in our cultural fabric. But there is a loophole. People are not born racist. Racism is taught, and racism is learned. And understanding how and why beliefs are developed along racial lines hold the promise of healing, liberation, and the unleashing of individuals' vast potential. That makes the community, that makes who you are. So as I move to the next slide, I want to also give you a little bit of history about what this concept of white privilege. Professor Peggy McIntosh in 1988 wrote an essay, White Professor, in which she realized that as a white female, she realized that she had some privileges, that she had more power and access than a Black male. So she wrote this essay, and she said, I had come to see white privilege as an invisible package of unearned asset that I can count on cashing each day. She realized that she can walk into a store and she was not going to be followed just by the fact that she was white. But she witnessed individuals of color walk into a store and being followed. So she said, white privilege is like an invisible weightless knapsack of special provisions, maps, passports, code books, visas, clothes, tools, and a blank check. These things that she did not ask for, but because of who she was racially, were just given to her. So this is 1988. So white privilege, this term shows up in history and it morphs, it changes. It creates dissonance because it says white, if you're white, you have a privilege. And how ironic that here I am, a woman of color, I identify myself as a Black Latina woman, talking about the concept of white privilege. Because I needed to come to understand that there were things about who I was, that it did not matter how many degrees I hold, I don't have access to certain things. Things were denied, things are questioned. So I needed to learn about it. What is this thing? That it doesn't matter how high I might try to climb on this professional ladder, there is some blocks, there is things. So as I move us to the next slide, I have multiple definitions. So Peggy McIntosh continued to say, this privilege exists when one group has something of value that is denied to others simply because of the groups they belong to, rather than because of anything they have done or failed to do. 400 years ago, then all men were created equal. The fact that yesterday we celebrated just 100 years of the signing of the 19th Amendment, they give women the right to vote. So this is the history. So when, by belonging to a group, these things is just given, just because, not because you asked, but just because somebody created the other. However, the access to the privilege doesn't determine one's outcomes, but it's definitely an asset that makes it more likely that whatever talent, ability, and aspirations a person with privilege has will result into something positive for them. I need you to keep this in mind as we move in and as you listen to the perspectives of the guest speakers. So the next definition that I'm going to present to you is a little bit stronger in nature. And this is a more recent one, 2016. So this one is by Christina Emma. She is a columnist. And she said, it is the level of societal advantage that comes with being seen as the norm in America, automatically confer irrespective of wealth, gender, or other factors. It makes life smoother, but sometimes you will barely notice unless it was suddenly taken away, or unless it was never applied to you. So I'm going to introduce you to a concept, the power of the normal. The power of the normal is this concept that that's the way things have always been, so we're not going to question it. So when we don't have to question why these things come to us and why others have to go after, is the normalcy that comes with the privilege in the association with race, white. So let me bring you a little further on her definition. It is the idea that just by virtue of being a white person of any kind, you're part of the dominant group, which tends to be respected, assumed the best of, and given the benefit of the doubt. And that isn't the case for people of color, other races, no matter how wealthy, smart, or hardworking they might be. I know through my years of doing professional development, training, and conversations about what is white privilege, I know how uncomfortable this is. I know it, the dissonance. But the reality is that understanding the history and how this term moves across history to perpetuate itself, it is under the system of injustice, what we call racism. And it tends to perpetuate itself until we are able to see it. So I'm going to move you to the next definition. So this is by Francis Kendall that says, having greater access to power and resources than people of color in the same situation. Brackets, do. So when I mentioned to you level of attainment, no matter how many degrees, there is always this thing, these walls for our Black and brown communities, or the fact that association with action and emotions or behavior just because of the color of the skin. We can go to the next slide. And I know I have only 10 minutes, so I'm going to move as quickly. White privilege is both unconsciously enjoyed and consciously perpetuated. It is both on the surface and deeply embedded into American life. So let me explain that a little bit. I have mentioned a few times, just because of somebody's race as they identify themselves being white, because white is also a race. You are earning, if you identify yourself as white, you have this privilege that come associated with that. So you can unconsciously, not realizing that because of that, you're getting access to a lot of things, so you never question it. But then there is others that know they have it and consciously perpetuate the power and privilege. And that is the work that the coalition has been doing for the last 2 years. Understanding, because if we cannot have a conversation about what this is and what it does to the community, especially as our communities demographically are changing. Why? Because, just because. So we need to understand that what this thing that is called white privilege comes the power of the normal. We cannot allow ourselves for that level of normalcy. The fact that a man lost his life and we all witness it, and we are on the streets demonstrating, is because we are saying as a community, enough is enough, because the cry of our Black and brown communities have been heard. It's no longer about what a friend told me happened to them, what my friend of color told me happened to him or her. We witness it. And the thing about this is that our children witness it. So the image, and I'm about to close my remarks, the image of that moment, May 25th, of a man of color on the ground being held by power associated with race and position, it is the pain of the history that has been associated with injustice for our Black and brown communities. So the key to understanding is realizing who you are and the power that you hold and how you use it. So I'm going to stop there because I know I only have 10 minutes and there's other speakers. So thank you so much for this opportunity. And I look forward to the continued collaboration and support. Thank you so much.
Ingrid, thank you so very much for that perspective and for sharing it so eloquently. Part of the reason why we asked for you to give us some definitions is that you have worked so well with our coalition, and you have given us so much information and done it with such a kind heart and compassion, and with the understanding to learn, and that learning is hard. That's why we knew that you would be the right person for today. So I thank you for doing that and for sharing your perspective. Our next speaker is Steve Medancy.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you, Ingrid. As I've said in the past, thank you to members of our subcommittee here for organizing this community conversation and hosting this today. It's wonderful that we're at this point that we're doing this and that we're able to do it despite everything else that's going on around us with return recovery during a pandemic. So I appreciate your support and effort in keeping this conversation going. It's so important. If you had asked me to speak about this probably 2 to 3 years ago, I would have struggled to share my thoughts and feelings, because I don't know if I would have recognized through my own personal experiences how I may have benefited from being white and some of the systems and structures and history. You know, as Ingrid so eloquently just said, the pain associated with the history of Black and brown people. But and Christina, your opening statements were spot on, and you almost stole my thunder, because initially when I first heard the term, my initial reaction, I would have to be honest, was that I was offended by the statement. You know, white privilege, to me, it was making a broad assumption that I've not had to work for anything that I have, that it was just given to me. You know, it flew in the face of the idea of individualism and meritocracy, and that's kind of what I was inculcated into, and, you know, growing up in a predominantly white community. That you can be anything you want to be, you can do anything you want to be. That's what we were always told. But when you're all white, that might be just that possible, right? But as you start to step back, as you had said so well, and reflect on your own personal experiences and listen to people and be willing to learn. One of the things that I thought about, you know, was what throughout my life has led me to where I am today. So for instance, my first home. My parents put the deposit down on my first home using money that they had in the bank that they had acquired from the sale of my grandparents' home. My grandparents got that home because they were in a green-lined neighborhood that my grandfather, who served in the military, qualified for a home loan with, in a desirable neighborhood. And, you know, upon their passing, and when my parents inherited that home, they had equity in it, and they put that away. And so I was able to buy a home in our neighborhood, essentially using money that dates way back to greenlining. If we think about the benefits of a person through systems and structures of white people. So there would be, for me, my most tangible example, and in recent years of thinking, how have I benefited personally, not so much professionally, but I'm just sharing a personal example on that front. Another example for me to me, the term white privilege, now that I understand it, is also very much related for me personally, again, to my level of racial consciousness. So there are times that you will understand where you may, or people that are white are benefiting when you see a system or structure that may be inherently flawed. So, you know, I used saying last week that Ingrid has taught me and that I've held near and dear: once you see it, you can't unsee it. As something as simple as reading the newspaper a few weeks back, which I don't really do all that much. I don't really have time to do that. And I try to find positive news, and sometimes there's not always a lot of positive news in the nightly news, the newspapers, anywhere where you look these days. But that particular day, I just happened to be scrolling through the paper, and the Associated Press column portion of the newspaper was there. And on the far left-hand column, and it was so vivid to me that day, and I would have never seen this prior to examining, you know, the term white privilege and my own racial consciousness. Paul Manafort was released due to concerns over COVID-19. The next article right below it talked about the outbreak of COVID viruses in prisons amongst incarcerated inmates. So I'm seeing a person, a white person, who's now being released from prison so that he's not at risk to catch this virus. And I'm seeing right below that a separate article, not related in this story, about the major outbreak of COVID, you know, the spike and surge in COVID diagnosed cases for folks that are not going to be given that same opportunity. Now, I don't know what the demographic makeup of that group is, you know, in that article, but if you know what the prison statistics are in our nation, you don't need to think too far into, you know, the differences in circumstances there. Another time we did an exercise as a member of the coalition, so on a professional level, we are all, I feel like we have a nice representation of folks on our coalition, you know, from elected and appointed officials to our teaching staff, administrators, parents, community agencies, race, ethnicity. So we did an exercise called the color line exercise. And we were each read a set of conditions or statements, and you moved along the color line based on your personal experience relative to that condition or statement. And each statement or condition that was read, you saw a movement amongst folks along the color line. And these weren't far-reaching statements. They weren't things that were well out of the norm or, you know, blatant acts of discrimination or racism that you would see highlighted, you know, in a feature story. These were everyday incidents. And for me, as I moved up that color line and I saw the overall color line, it's a very tangible and real example of how there are differences amongst the races and the opportunities and the access we have, and even our own experiences. And to me, that relates both to my level of racial consciousness, but also white privilege and how systems and structures sometimes benefit people more than others. I mean, for me personally, when I think of, as I speak about my own childhood, when I talked about my house, that was my stepfather and my mom who had provided me that down payment for much of my life. I was a member of a household with a single mom, 4 children who worked in a factory. We lived on a second floor property of a 3-story tenement house right through high school. And my mom did not have much. She rode to the church on her bike in the 90s to get food from the food bank. She had $38 that got deposited every Tuesday into her ATM. So that was like a savings account. We knew on Tuesdays we got our $38. And that would get us to Friday because we could put gas in the tank. She'd probably get a few treats for us that were sweet that we wouldn't otherwise have, because all the rest of the money went to bills, because that's a single mom. So when I heard that term white privilege and I thought of what I grew up with and where I am now, that was that emotional reaction. Like, what do you mean privilege? Do you know where I came from and what I've had to do to get to where I am today? I didn't get a scholarship. Nobody paid for my school. Nobody gave me a job. I had to study. I had to interview. But that was my initial reaction with a lower level of racial consciousness. But today, I think of it now because of my level of racial consciousness, but I never walked into an interview in the past. People joke with me that I'm decent with interviews. My wife says, you can walk into a room, Steve. But I've never walked into a room and said, wow, oof, this is uncomfortable. I'm the only white person in here. I've never said that to myself. But I guarantee you people of color have said that to themselves and experienced that. And I don't even feel comfortable speaking for you today, but it's happened. I guarantee it. Or when you're in positions of power or influence, you're still navigating how that plays out, because you do know that there's a game. There's social rules in order, if you will, to how to navigate through that. And I don't say that to offend anybody in a leadership position, because I'm, Ingrid and I have presented at various conferences. I recognize and I will admit that I'm a white person in a position of power. So with my privilege, I can choose to make the coalition a priority. I can use my power to have community conversations when other folks in the community don't feel we need to have this conversation, because we're doing just fine. So I'm going to choose to use my privilege to try and promote the conversations, because I will tell you, I am an absolute example of someone who I felt like I didn't have a discriminatory bone in my body until I examined my own levels of bias and racial consciousness. I felt like I never was given privilege because things were handed to me. I felt like I had to work for everything I got. And now that I've actually taken some time to step back, reflect, and examine my own personal experience and my story, I've rethought that a little bit. And that's, I think, at the end of the day, as a community, all we can hope for is for people to just step back, be willing to listen, think about it, and reflect. We're not trying to change people's minds. We're not trying to convince anybody of anything, because at the end of the day, you're only going to be where your personal experiences have taken you. Where my experiences shouldn't change anybody else's feelings about where they are and the power or the privilege they may have, because I don't know their background or their story that's unique to them. So that's about what I have to share today. But I just want to thank you for giving me that opportunity. That's my truth.
Steve, I can't thank you enough for sharing your truth. That was very well done, and such a great opportunity for me to say that the timing must have been right or appropriate when I happened to be able to grab you in the hallway here in the municipal center and say, our committee has an idea, and it was right before reopening was going to be handed to you. And Steve said, this is great timing, move on it. So when Steve says that he is going to use his power to push the conversation forward, that's what he did. He gave our committee the opportunity, the green light to move forward, to be able to have these conversations. So Steve, thank you, not only for your perspective, but for letting us move forward.
Thank you, Kristen.
We are now going to turn to Pastor Holt, who has some her own perspective that she wishes to share with us. Pastor?
Hi, first let me say thank you for asking me to be on the panel. It's a privilege and an honor to be part of this panel. And I also want to reiterate, this is my personal story, my personal perspective. I can only speak for myself and of my own experiences. Although the term white privilege has been around since 1988, I have to be honest and say that I only became part of the dialogue a couple of years ago. Once I did a little research and parsed the term out, I discovered to my dismay that I am indeed the product of white privilege. For me, white privilege means I was raised in and moved through a culture that was geared to my needs. The terms of offering of stores, financial institutions, academic environments, and the culture at large, to be white for me was the norm. And it doesn't mean that I didn't have to face challenges, just like Steve mentioned, or other types of discrimination and hardship in my life. It means that I have never been discriminated against based on the color of my skin. I was born 8 years after the Great World War, World War II. My father was a US Navy veteran who benefited from the GI Bill, which was a huge financial package voted by Congress in 1944, which offered to some, not all, veterans, a huge number of benefits, among them being educational grants for education and low-interest mortgages. It was only a year ago that I learned that Black veterans were denied these same benefits. It is reverse affirmative action. The GI Bill made it possible for my father to build a home in a white suburb of Boston, Massachusetts. Living in a white suburb meant white was the norm in school, on the playground, in stores, movie theaters, virtually every place I went. Fast forward now to college. It did not seem at all odd to me that I went to a predominantly white school. When I graduated, I went to work at a predominantly white institution, Harvard University. I worked there for 29 years, 26 of them as an administrator in one of their 13 undergraduate houses. There were 12 other house administrators in the system. And there was obviously turnover in those positions over the years, but in 26 years, there were only white administrators, never a Black person, never a Latinx, and I never questioned this. I left Harvard University in 2013 to accept a position as a full-time pastor in an industrial town in northern Massachusetts. That is where my real diversity education began. The church was wonderfully diverse, with Black, white, Chinese, African, Jamaican, and other very diverse cultural members. In fact, the whites were a distinct minority in that congregation. I discovered there was a much richer texture and tone to our fellowship and worship when we abandoned the white normal and embraced other cultural traditions. I came to Southington 8 years ago. I recognized it immediately as being almost exactly like the town I grew up in. I understood its background. I understood its growth and progress because it was so familiar, right down to the size of the population and the diversity back in the 50s and 60s and today. I was surprised when I met people, and it still happens today, who ask me what I do and where I do it. When I answer that I'm the pastor of the First Baptist Church, the response is often, "Oh, the Black church." Well, no, we're a faith community. We're comprised of many colors and ethnicities, including some Black families. That is a brief summary of how I came to be here and how I became the person I am. I own my white privilege, and I strive every day to recognize how it has given me unearned advantages and how I can work to level the field so that all have the same privilege regardless of their race, ethnicity, sex, sexual orientation, or skin color. That's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Pastor, that was beautifully said. Thank you so much. I appreciate you speaking your truth and sharing your perspective with this group of people. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We're now turning to our youth voice, Trevor Messina, who may be no stranger to some, as he is well known in town for all of his involvement in our community. And we are lucky, Trevor, to have had you involved. We are happy that you are on to college, and thank you for making time for us in your dorm room. But we appreciate you sharing your perspective with us today. Trevor, you're next.
Thank you so much. It's truly an honor to be here. I was very honored when I got the call from Mrs. Sims to be asked to be here, because this is truly something that I devote a lot of my volunteer effort to, and spend a lot of time on, and it's a subject that I'm very passionate about. And so when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about today, it was hard to, I guess, pick the right thing to say. So I think going back to what's been said, and I'm going to reiterate it, when I first heard the term white privilege, it was recently within the last year or so. And like the other presenters have said before me, one of the initial things I reacted to was the privilege portion of it. I recognize that I come from a well-off middle-class family, a white family, and that I go to a good school. I, have a supportive family. But to me, it goes back to that nothing was handed to me in my life. I am a student who lived with autism Asperger's and is a member of the LGBTQ+ community. So my life has had many challenges and still does to this day. It is a daily struggle that I have to go through between juggling my Asperger's with my social and emotional connections, and then my being a part of the LGBTQ+ community. I walk out into the world every day scared in a way, because I know that people are physically, verbally, or non-verbally judging my life choices and who I am as a person. And it's scary. It was something that my mom was very nervous about sending me to college, because I'm her little boy, and she was very nervous. But now I'm here at school, and I've lived on this campus that is full of so many different people, so many different cultures, so many backgrounds and lifestyles that I feel comfortable, which was something that is hard to find. So I think in terms of white privilege, that was something that I had a hard time grappling with. That idea that I was, because I was white, I was given all of this that I have. But then I started focusing on the white part and not the privilege part. I was listening to a podcast, I can't remember because my memory is kind of shot right now, who was speaking in the podcast, but they said that white privilege is basically that the color of my skin is never going to be an obstacle when applying for a job, when going into a store, when going about my daily life. And that kind of, I had to take a step back and think about that and be like, oh, that's a different way to think about it. Because the person was right. Because I'm white, that's the first thing people see when they see me. They see that I'm a white man. They don't know that I have autism Asperger's. They don't know that I'm a member of the LGBTQ+ community. They just see that I'm a white man. So that was something that made me think, and has kind of been something that I think about a lot. And so I think that one of my examples of recognizing my privilege was when I was serving on the Board of Ed as a student representative in my junior year. And it was just after the racist video had come out, and many students of color came to the board meeting and gave their perspective on what they felt and had experienced on a daily basis. And these were students who I had been friends with, who I knew, who I was close with, and I had never heard these things from them until that moment. I sat in that seat and was in shock. I cried at that moment. I felt so guilty and didn't know what to do. All I could do in that moment was sit there and just say, I'm sorry. Because that was all I could do in that moment. That was all I could think about. And I think that was really what kind of kept me on this course, was that to see kids my own age, to see in their own school being treated like this, in a place that I had learned to call a home, and a place that I had felt that people accepted one another, but really they didn't, broke my heart. Because I had given so much of myself to my community, so much of myself to my school, and then these kids are coming forward saying that they feel different. And that was very hard for me. So I think that was kind of a big turning point in recognizing my white privilege and recognizing that, you know, I can use my position to give back and to, you know, be an advocate and an ally. It's something that, again, I'm very passionate about, and I'm going to school right now to be a music teacher. And I think my biggest reason for that is because I was offered such a supportive and loving community by being in my marching band and by being in my music program, that I wanted to pay that forward and offer that same welcoming, accepting space to other students down the line. Because for me to walk out into the world knowing that there are students who are not being treated equally because of something as simple as the color of their skin, or their sexual orientation, or their social or economic status, whatever it may be, that broke my heart. And I knew that I could do something about that. But I knew that I was in a place where I had worked hard, I could go to this school, to get into this program, and to pay that back to the next generation of students, the next generation of kids. And it's really, I've enjoyed every moment that I've been with this coalition, with the Board of Ed. It was an honor to serve on the Board of Ed for 2 years and, you know, really make a difference in my community. And I think that now that I've had these small experiences in just my short 18 years on this earth, I now am going to take those experiences and go and apply them to when I do become a music teacher, to when I maybe one day become, I don't know, my dream job is to become a conductor on Broadway. Who knows? But to take these experiences now and use them for when I go on to do other things in my life. And I will never forget the stories that I've been told, the experiences that I've experienced, and, you know, continuing this work. It's incredibly important. And I think that it's especially important for kids in my generation to get involved, to be vocal, to be active. We have the power to shape our future. We have the power to make real change. And so I think it is important for kids like myself, kids in college, kids in high school, heck, kids in middle school and elementary school, to be involved, to, you know, be accepting, kind, caring, contributing members of society, as I'm honest. So that being said, I am incredibly honored to have spoken in front of all of you today. I thank you all for inviting me, and I can't wait to see what else this coalition does. Yeah, thank you so much.
If we could take the opportunity to give our speakers a round of applause, either with your emojis or you can raise your hands and clap. Trevor, that was wonderful, better than I could have ever hoped for. But what I really want to draw people's attention to is how you made it come full circle and how your perspective sort of echoed what Ingrid started with at the beginning in terms of we don't have the power to change what has happened for 400 years, right? We have the power to move forward. And it gives us all something to think about as we can provide allies to our own peers. You are an ally to your peers, and I can be an ally to my peers. And we can all move forward and work together. And with that being said, I mean, this is such a good position that we are all in to do something. And Trevor, I appreciate you making that call to action. Like, we are here together. There are 54 of us on this call, and we can all be moved to action and work together to support our own peers with that movement forward. So Trevor, very well done. Thank you. I remember those stories as well, and I know the stories continue, and I know my peers have shared stories with me, and I can't forget either. Once you've seen it, you can't ever unsee it. And I'm grateful that I can see it because I don't ever want to unsee it again. So we are having this opportunity right now. We are going to open it up to share perspectives. Now, I just want to go over the parameters once again. Everybody's mics will remain muted. You can indicate that you would like to share your perspective by the raise hand feature, or you can communicate with the host through the chat box. We will go in order that we receive them. We're asking that you be brief. We do have time, but it's amazing how quickly that time passes. We are asking that it not be a question and answer. That's not the point of today. Today is not a question and answer session. It's not a debate. Today is an opportunity for us all to share our perspectives if we feel so inclined, okay? So we are asking you to keep it brief, keep it on topic, and be respectful to those in the room. If there is a question that does come out, please know that we will take your question back to our coalition as feedback, and we will discuss it as a coalition, as all information is very valuable, and to share multiple perspectives is why we are here. That's why we will call it a quote unquote conversation. So we're going to move forward. Michelle, do we have some people who would like to speak and share their perspective?
We do. So as Christina mentioned, is that you do have the opportunity either in the participant box to raise your hand or in the chat box to let us know that you'd like to participate in this portion of the presentation. So the first person I have that would like to speak is Margaret Walsh. Meg, if you can go ahead and unmute your mic.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So good afternoon, everybody. Sorry I jumped on late. I just wanted to say that I too, I remember when I first heard the term white privilege, I was with Steve and Tim. I said, I wasn't privileged. I said we were poor, but Tim said, Meg, you're like just white privilege all over the place. So as I learned and grew with the committee and the work we did in the meetings with Ingrid and, you know, reaching out to other community members, you know, and I, like Steve, thought I didn't have a, you know, a prejudicial bone in my body, and I always advocated for people and so on and so forth. Well, I learned differently. So because of that knowledge that I've learned and things that I've witnessed in the committee, and I remember Trevor sitting next to me and he was crying. Many people were brought to tears that night, and I was embarrassed that this was going on. and what we're doing about it, and how could we be so blind as the adults to let this occur. So anyhow, I'm going to continue to stay on the committee, and that what I've learned and the work that I've done. I now work in another district. I was retired only for a little couple of weeks, but that's all right. But I'm taking that work and knowledge, and I'm bringing that information forward to another area in Connecticut that, you know, is where we were like 3 years ago or 4 years ago. So, and my daughter is very much proactive with many different things, and I encourage her to be the voice. And as Trevor mentioned, you know, that generation, get out and vote and do what we need to do. And I appreciate being on this committee tremendously. And we need to talk about these issues, have difficult conversations, make those critical interruptions. And when you hear somebody being disrespectful or rude or using a racial slur or comment, and that's how we're going to gradually move things forward, as Christina so nicely said. So thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you, Meg.
Thank you so much, Meg. And we miss you already, but we're excited that you're sharing with other districts. Next, we have Lauren Johns. Lauren, if you can go ahead and unmute. Lauren is a colleague from CERC, and Lauren was actually on our session 2 presentation. And Valerie DiPaolo, you'll be on deck.
So I did want to speak to the notion about people of color in this community. I'm only speaking for myself. I cannot speak for everybody. But seeing the amount of people jumping onto these conversations and wanting to remind those of you that are on, that are willing to do this hard work, that we need allies. We need allies in this town. It's pretty hard. Ingrid kind of alluded to it in the beginning. It's very difficult for me to sit here as a woman of color and try to explain white privilege to someone. I can give them all the definitions, I can give them all the memes in the world, but I don't have that experience. I can't talk about being a man of color any more than I can talk about being, you know, another woman. But I do have the experience of being a student here, and now being a professional, and now being a parent. So it is really inspiring, and it's really great to see these allies and just spread the word. We talked about it earlier. Christina had talked about it. If you see something, interrupt it. Those critical interruptions are huge. They're uncomfortable, even for people of color. They're really uncomfortable. But continue to have these conversations, and I know that Southington is moving in the right direction.
Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Lauren. Valerie, we'll go ahead and ask you to unmute your mic.
Thank you. So I just wanted to say that I really was impressed with what Ingrid said about realizing who you are and the power that you have and how you use it. I think that really is key for many of us that are interested in this and really want to see change. And I'm so impressed with Steve and Reverend Holt and Trevor. You know, they're taking the steps and doing that. They are looking at what power they have and how they are using it. And so I guess that's, you know, that's something that I'm hoping to do, is to choose to use my privilege to continue to move this. And I believe we need this in Southington. There is much work to do in Southington, and if there are people that feel that we do not have a problem, I just think they're wrong. And I love your second question that you have here, with a new, deeper understanding, what will be your next step? I think that's something that we all kind of have to ask each other of ourselves, and really look deep and just continue to move this. So thank you to all the speakers. You know, I'm humbled by your words, and it gives me a lot of hope for what is to come with Southington.
Thank you, Val.
Val, thank you. Thank you for your comments and your continued leadership in this regard. We don't currently have anyone in the queue, so I would invite others if you would.
Michelle, I apologize. I didn't mean to jump in. I do have a chat. I do have a comment from Bill McKernan, and if you don't mind, I'll read that. I didn't realize it wasn't in everybody's chat.
Okay.
It says, when my great-grandfather came to the USA from Ireland in the 19th century, he was discriminated against. No Irish need apply. But after only one generation, my grandfather was able to lose his accent and no longer be discriminated against because of the color of his skin. He was white. That's white privilege that has been passed down to me.
And Lauren, that was represented by whom?
That is William McKernan. So thank you very much for that perspective, William.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Michelle, while other people are contemplating their perspectives, I can just go over our next steps as a coalition, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So our next steps as a coalition is, first of all, I thank you all again for being here. And those of you who have come back several times, we appreciate that. As I said, our coalition has taken time to digest all of this information and talk with one another. So I recommend that you do the same and talk with one another and digest the information and do whatever you can. Reach out if you'd like more information or things to read. I know our coalition has had plenty of reading. Thank you, Ingrid. But I do want to let you know that we will be sending out a survey to all participants through all conversations that we have had. And in that survey, we're just looking for your feedback on further topics you would like to discuss that we can put out for these conversations. We are going to take all of that feedback from that survey. We are going to go back to the coalition with that feedback, and we are going to talk about it as a coalition and how we can then continue these conversations, because it doesn't end here. This is just the beginning. This is just our start. We wanted to make sure that we could get out there and talk to people, get their feedback, and then come back with some more information. And like I said, there are 6 other committees who are doing the work. We are just one of 7 committees that are doing the work. So you will see more information coming out, not just from our committee, but from the others as well. So I just wanted to briefly put that out to everybody, because this coalition is a living, breathing group of people who want to continue the work here in Southington, not only for students, but for all residents. So Michelle, I believe we have another perspective.
Yes, we do. I actually am going to ask Gloria Francesca to unmute her mic, and Vanessa Hawk, you will be on deck. Gloria Francesca, Lauren.
Oh, there you go.
There
Okay.
she goes. Yep, perfect.
So I am Gloria Francesca Mengual, and so I wanted to say a little bit about the impact of white privilege on people of color and internalized racism. So I'm Latinx. My mother is from Puerto Rico. My father is from Spain. I often refer to myself as a passing Puerto Rican. You know, people look at me and think I'm Italian or French or whatever, Southern European. And I learned early on from my mom, who is the Puerto Rican side of that marriage, that if anybody asks me, what are you? To just say that I'm a Spaniard. And that happened because I was in a Polish Catholic school, and my brother and I were the first Hispanics that attended that school, and we fit right in. But then the Diaz family moved in, and they were brown Puerto Ricans, and they started using nasty words toward them, and I didn't say anything when they were saying derogatory things, and Laura Diaz became a friend of mine, and I still didn't speak out. And I felt so guilty. I went home and I was like, Mommy, I didn't say anything, and they're calling Laura this and that, and she said, if anybody asks what you are Spanish from Spain. You don't need to tell them you're Puerto Rican. I was 10 years old, and I never admitted that side of my identity until I was in my early 20s, because I got the message that my Spaniard side was better. So that's just an example of a parent that she's just seeing her 2 kids and saying, hey, they can pass. Let me teach them to do that. And it took me a long time to immerse myself in Park Street, Hartford, and the wonderful the food I always ate, but my culture I really stepped away from until I was in my 20s. And it is what it is, as they say. That's an unfortunate phrase these days, but.
Gloria, thank you for sharing your perspective.
Thank you, Gloria. We have Vanessa Hawk and then Victoria Triano, you'll be on deck. Vanessa, if you can please unmute.
Hi, thank you very much. Sorry about that. I just wanted to say thank you for putting on these conversations. I believe that this is a really important thing to talk about in our town. I also wanted to say I appreciate Val for sharing her thoughts, and I just wanted to throw it out there. I'd love to hear thoughts from any of the other town council members that are present from the call. Just because this is an important conversation to be having, and this is our opportunity to all share in it and share our perspectives. So thanks again for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you, Vanessa. And yes, we have Chairwoman Victoria Triano. I'm going to ask you to unmute, Victoria. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Good. Okay. I'm sorry. I wanted to thank the coalition. These conversations have been so important for Southington. And many people have been on the call and haven't spoken for all three of the meetings, but people are listening and people are talking. And on behalf of the entire council, I'm very happy that we're beginning these conversations on a community level. Pastor Sharon Holt and coming up in the fall, Pastor Ron Brown are also going to be, Pastor Ron Brown is also going to be hosting community conversations. I really hope the coalition will get involved and support those. They will be done periodically during the course of the year. And again, bringing up these topics so that we can continue to have conversations. There's such fear when we talk about things like this, but it's because we don't know and have never really understood. As we talk and as we converse with one another, healing happens and we can go forward together as a community. So I just wanted to say thank you for all of the members on the coalition and for the speakers. It has been a wonderful 3 sessions. I had a problem last session getting on. I'm not the most competent person with IT, so you have to kind of forgive me for that. But I did try, but I was able to do it today. So thank you very much. On behalf of the town of Southington, thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman Triano. I would like to just remind us to use this time to share our stories, right? So our personal experiences within our community, with growing up outside of this community, as it relates to your recognition and discovery of white privilege. The next person that would be available to speak or has their hand raised is Lisa Pelletier. So I'll ask for you to unmute your mic. And then I'm going to go ahead and look for who would be next after that. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Lisa.
Okay, so my name is Lisa Pelletier. I've lived in town for over 30 years. I grew up in Wallingford, another town that has a long history of problems with racism, much like Southington does. I did some diversity work during my corporate career at what was then Northeast Utilities. I was on their diversity council, and that's where I first learned about the term white privilege. And we did some exercises, a white privilege walk, where it sounds similar to the color walk that you were talking about. And it's a very telling exercise and really made me realize how much of what I've gained in my life has been because of the privilege that comes to me because of the color of my skin. But even with that background and what I felt like was a fairly good awareness, when I moved to Southington, I didn't necessarily really think that there was much of a problem. And in the past few years, I was galvanized by finding out how supportive of the Trump administration our lovely town is. It's galvanized me to be more involved and more energized, more aware. And I think these conversations are terrific. But I think that when I look at all the people on the call, with the exception of a few, you're all people that I recognize as seeing on some of our town pages and already kind of in support of this work. And what happens on the town pages is that people who are supportive of this work are usually overwhelmed by the hate and by the people who are not supportive of this work. And I think that while all of this talk is, it's great. I think we learn from each other. I'm happy to see 54 people on there, but you could add a couple of zeros to that number for the people who hated that there was going to be a conversation about white privilege. And I only see a couple of those people on this call. So I think the town is missing those folks. I think you're getting people that are already willing to do the work. I have no idea how to get those folks engaged, but I think that we need to do something beyond the talking. And when people in town and the town council has an opportunity to put some action behind the words, say by listening to all the conversation about why the Columbus statue is such a hateful image to be outside our
Lisa, we
municipal
are
building.
gonna have to, I'm sorry to.
Wrap it up.
Nope, I'm sorry to interrupt. Just for other people to be able to share their perspectives, I just have to pause you right now. But I appreciate you sharing your perspective. And, you know, I agree, there are a lot of people here who are willing to do the work, and I'm happy that we're all here willing to do the work. So thank you for your perspective.
Thank you, Lisa. Next we have Tanetta McCaw, and on deck we have Tina Riccio. So please unmute Tanetta.
Jeanette, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yep, it just gave me the option. Thank you. So I'm kind of piggybacking off of Lisa, and actually something that's happened to me in joining these conversations when we talk about white privilege. And as you can tell, I am not white, I am Black, is a mispronunciation of names. For most people, that doesn't affect them, but my name is Tanita, and it is often mispronounced. That in its own self is a sense of white privilege, where people are able to sit and automatically they can pronounce the name Becky or the name Susan, things like that. But a name like Tanita or Aaliyah or Alyssa makes it really difficult for people to understand that they're not able to. Also kind of piggybacking off what Lisa said as well, I do just want to comment that when people do make their observations and comments about what they have gone through, and other people come at them to say that is not correct, it is hurtful. So I just really am hoping as well that the Southington keyboard warriors and others can get together with their friends who have been enlightened by the trauma that people of color like myself and others in town have faced, and they can learn to understand white privilege. Thank you.
Tanita, thank you for your clarification and thank you for correcting us on how to say your name. I apologize for that. And that is a good example of white privilege. So I appreciate that perspective. Thank you. It is 5:20, Michelle, so we have room for one more perspective before we need to close up.
Yep, so Tina Riccio, if you could unmute your mic, please.
Hi, I was just gonna say, I forgot who the woman before Tanita, I forgot her name, I'm so sorry. When she was asking about how, how do you get more people involved, I think it's just really important to listen to the kids because they always have the answer. And last week, the students that spoke said something that really resonated with me, and it was that people need to see how it benefits them. If people are in power, they are never going to willingly give that up if it is not going to benefit them, right? And so you have to show them that why this is important and how it benefits everyone, how it benefits the whole society to have equity, to have these, to eliminate the white privilege. And so I just think, and the kids get it. The kids talked about it, they get it, and they have the answers. And I think we just, in a lot of situations, we need to follow their lead. Thanks.
Tina, that was very well stated because a lot of this coalition work was as a result of students making a call to action and students saying, we need help and we want you to help us. And I'm so grateful for those students. So very well said, great point. As you can see on your screen, these are just some things to consider as a community and how we can move this forward. I don't need to read them to you, you can read them yourselves, but I do want to let you know that we will be sending out the PowerPoint from this conversation as well as the second conversation. You will receive both of those in your email boxes as well as the survey. And we really would appreciate your feedback and information on topics to share. I've had a lot of great suggestions come through on different initiatives that people want to start. And I think that's wonderful. Keep them coming. You have my contact information and we will bring that information back to the coalition and get more people involved and get more people willing to help out. I also want to mention to you that these conversations were recorded. We had mentioned that in the flyer, wanted to let people know so that for people who weren't able to make this time frame, we still have the information and can share this information with others. Those are going to be led, they were going to be posted on a specific website. And once that is done, we are in the process of getting that done. Once that's done, that will also be sent out to you and sent out to people at large so that people can continue to listen to this and hear what was been stated from our presenters, because it was all very, very good information. But I just want to make sure that I offer anybody else in our committee, whether it be Michelle or Lauren, do you guys have anything else you need to say before we wind up for the day? No? Okay. Well, we thank you all again for being here. We really appreciate everybody's participation and all those who shared their perspectives. We have heard you, we've captured the information, and we will bring it back to the coalition. Thank you for being our allies, and thank you to all of our presenters for being here today. We appreciate that. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
We can go ahead and stop the recording.